free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
And here we go, off and running on a Friday morning. Glad you're a part of the program. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent, talking the most interesting / important topics from a sports perspective in the state of South Carolina, and then who knows where it's going to go from there, especially on a Friday in June as we sit here today, wide open. Love for you to be a part of the show as well. Live video stream up and rolling on YouTube and Twitter, Facebook. We got the live audio going on Podbean right now, and just figured out how to push the buttons to get the podcast version of the program up and rolling on the Apple Podcast, so you can pop that into the iTunes, if they still call it that. I think they've changed that official name, but I saw it as iTunes somewhere yesterday. The Google Podcast's up and rolling now as well. I think we're all set. Anthony in this morning first with a great Friday morning to the UFAs. RL, Craig, Jason as well in. Good to see you guys. Thanks for being a part of the show. York making it in as well, giving a morning, Tim and the UFA gang. A Friday, so we're going to call it Fill in the Blank Fridays. Last week we went with September noon games at Williams-Brice Stadium. Fill in the blank. Got a lot of great reaction, a lot of creativity, let's say. So this week, the Fill in the Blank Friday, officially, after some social media videos I saw popping up last night, and if you were anywhere near the Bluff Road, George Rogers Boulevard portion of town in Columbia, South Carolina last night, you might have seen it yourself. Some LED light testing going on. Gamecock football adding LED lights is blank. What are you going with on that one? I'll give you mine first, and then we'll get to several of your comments. And would love to have as much fun with this all morning long as possible. But mine is very simple. Gamecock football adding LED lights at Williams-Brice Stadium is making me feel old. I mean, just the concept is kind of foreign to me. It makes me feel a little bit like it's the space version, the Star Wars version of live stadium stuff. And I know they've been doing it in stadiums for a while now. And it's not just football stadiums, baseball stadiums do this and the whole thing. And it is certainly an advantage of technology and kind of the next step in a lot of ways. It just makes me feel old at 44 years old. That's all. Never thought this would be a possibility for live sporting events. Never thought it would be a thing. But I do think it adds an element for sure at Williams-Brice Stadium this year for who knows how many night games you'll get, but you got one to start, the 7:30 kick against Georgia State, game number 1, September 3rd. So some of you weighing in this morning. Jason P. did it on Twitter, and a good response. He just goes simply with, it's about time. Georgia and others have had the laser and light rock concert show for years now. Definitely makes the game feel more electric. Our lights made our stadium look boring if you've ever seen those in person. Like that's hilarious to me that lights can make something look boring. But I guess from that perspective, if you're thinking of it as like a laser light rock concert, I always thought that Williams-Brice looked awesome when you come over the hill on Assembly and you see it kind of in the middle, or at least it used to be in the middle of the buildings on Assembly Street with Carolina Coliseum on the right. And then I remember the Hardys on the left way back in the day. That's how old I am. right there on Blossom Street coming by is what I'm thinking, what I have in my mind. But yeah, I know you can probably see it a little bit more, a couple streets up when you're coming over the hill there on Assembly. But I always thought it was situationed in the city of Columbia, where it looked like it was the center attraction. And I remember seeing it as a kid for the first time, thinking, "Is that a spaceship?" The way the lights, you can kind of see it in the background here. The lights kind of indent in, right, and the stadium kind of juts out and then indents in. I was like, to me, it was always the coolest looking football stadium that I had seen, and was every time I saw it as a kid, it was always, and this was typically on Saturdays coming to a game, I would just get excited, right? I associated that with excitement and fun and the whole thing. I never in my life, if you would have asked me then, would I have imagined that you could change the lights like during the game to different colors and the whole thing. And that's where we are. That's what will happen this year in 2022 for Gamecock football. So put a link in the live video stream, by the way. Troy goes with enlightening. That's what adding LED lights to Gamecock football. Clever, sir. Clever. Got a link up at the top in the live chat going this morning on you can see YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, I believe. And that is the way to join the show if you want to do the 21st century version of Call Into the Show. Just click on that link. We can pop you right in and we can talk it out. If you dare. If you want to mix it up on a Friday during the summer, that's what we'll do from now on. I'll just put the link at the top of the chat there. You can always go there. If you hear something, you say, wait a second, come on, man, that's not right. I have a lot to say about that. Or you say, yeah, I want to add in to that. However you want to do it. NCAA baseball tournament starting today as well. Was supposed to actually start right now or a few minutes ago. Down in Miami, they have a weather system coming in, and it's not pretty. It's going to be difficult to get in the regional at Coral Gables, and we've already seen why, right? So I think it was late last night or last night at some point, they decided to move the games up to try to get them in today, and about an hour ago, they already have moved today's games to tomorrow at Coral Gables, the Miami regional, with Ole Miss being a part of that thing as a 3 seed and a very controversial one at that. So the NCAA baseball tournament does start today. Was going to start a little earlier than originally anticipated because of the weather down in Miami. That's already been pushed back to tomorrow. So noon going to be the first games that get going today, and get it going for you on the ticker on the video portion of the program this morning, with some specific games, especially the ones. I'm not an ESPN Plus guy. They haven't gotten me on that yet, but I am an SEC network, and I'm a YouTube TV guy, so I get the SEC network, the regular ESPNs, the ACC network. So those games that will be on more traditional cable TV, I put those on the ticker for you just in case you want to check out some NCAA tournament baseball, which we've talked at length about here on the program, and will certainly miss from the Gamecock and Tiger fan standpoint, I think, in the state of South Carolina, with Coastal Carolina being the only Palmetto State team in this year's field of 64. They're playing at 6 o'clock today up in East Carolina. East Carolina, the 1 seed, hosting that regional. Coastal Carolina is the 3 seed, taking on number 2 seed Virginia at 6 o'clock today on ESPN Plus. But noon today, Florida State, UCLA on ESPN2. 1 o'clock today, you got Arkansas versus Grand Canyon in that Stillwater, Oklahoma State regional. That one's going to be on the SEC network with Arkansas there. The first ACC network games at 2 with Notre Dame and Texas Tech. And I think from maybe a resume standpoint, Texas Tech and Notre Dame might be the best game of the day when you're talking about 2 versus 3 seed. Tennessee gets going tonight at 6 o'clock against Alabama State. That one also on the SEC network. 6:30, Florida over on ESPNU against Central Michigan down in Gainesville. Virginia Tech on the ACC network in primetime tonight, hosting Wright State at 7. And then the late game on ESPNU. If you want to go college baseball all day and nearly all night, you got a 10:30 start. I guess that would be 7:30 local time out in Corvallis with Oregon State and New Mexico State. And I would imagine you're going to get ESPNU has done this before, kind of like the what do you call that? The NFL version on Sunday, where you get red zone. You might get a little bit of that going on tonight as well. I forget what they call it, on deck or something like that. But they'll pop around to some other games and show highlights and maybe even give you the live updates when you got some good moments. But it has the coverage of the NCAA baseball tournament has advanced tremendously, and looking forward to seeing what happens this year. But unfortunately, it'll be a little bit different for sure. Troy says, watched almost every Clemson baseball game this year on the ACC network. Yeah, and they call it Extra, right? The ACC network Extra. It's the ACC's version of that SEC network plus kind of thing that you don't have to have ESPN Plus for. You do have to just be subscribed to ESPN in a certain area where they offer the ACC or SEC network, and that's us. So we're fortunate from that standpoint. The only time we've gotten jobbed on that, I feel like, has been that Longhorn Network deal when Carolina baseball went out to Texas a couple of years ago, and that one was not available in our area unless you went on in and paid the extra, whatever it is, $7 or so to get that ESPN Plus stuff going. The big college baseball news coming out yesterday, and this just isn't specific to the player. Tommy White, Tommy Tanks is his nickname, from NC State, who hit a whole bunch of home runs and was a freshman of the year in college baseball. But he surprised a bunch of people yesterday by putting his name in the transfer portal. And this is not just a simple, hey, this is a good player who's going to transfer schools, and then you got the transfer portal, and is that a good thing? But this is the combination of kind of everything that is college athletics as we sit here on June 3rd, 2022. I had to check the little date on the top of the screen there before I said June 3rd, because the presumption is that name, image, and likeness is also wrapped up into this, and without having any kind of penalty by putting your name in the transfer portal, if you're one of the best players in college baseball and you've already had a tremendous year at your school, the one way to look at it is, why wouldn't you put your name in the transfer portal and see what's out there from an opportunity standpoint to make money? What is the downside? You can always remove your name from the transfer portal and go right back to where you were. And then the question becomes, is that what we want in college sports? Craig says going to Florida State. And he's originally from Florida, and that is certainly one of the speculations. And Jan saying the same thing. I'm hearing Tommy could end up at Florida State. He has some past travel ball buddies playing at Florida State already. I get it. It's the intra-conference transfer. That would be kind of odd. I know that he wants to get back closer to home, so I would think maybe Miami or Florida, and Miami also being in the ACC. An interesting one. But I guess maybe eventually we'll see if name, image, and likeness stuff is really tied to this. I would find it hard to believe that it's not, but you never know these stories, right? And we very rarely get all of it publicly when you're talking about players transferring from programs, especially good players, because a lot of times it can just be a personality issue with a coach and player. It can be a personality issue with player and other players, but we've never had the consideration. I guess maybe last year we did. I'm trying to think when this. No, I don't think we've ever had this. I guess with football, we've now seen it, right? In this past offseason with the name, image, and likeness availability. Never seen this from a baseball perspective after a full season with the opportunity for the next season. It's a weird spot, man. Again, I don't blame players right now for trying to take advantage to maximize their opportunities. This, again, falls back on the NCAA, who, what did I see yesterday? I think it was on social media. This might have been a Jimbo Fisher quote, actually, that instead of ready, aim, shoot, the NCAA, without putting any kind of guidance into this, any kind of real guardrails, it just went with ready, shoot, aim, right? And it is that's why we get the easy, hey, it's the wild, wild west out there now. I don't think anybody wants to see really good players like Tommy White at NC State do really well in their first year and then just completely be up for grabs. Jan says, I hate the portal. There's no loyalty anymore. I know I'm probably in the minority here and I'm old school. However, I'm okay with it if there's a coaching change. Did see that social media post yesterday as well, that the only time the transfer portal should be a free transfer without any kind of penalty is if there is a coaching change. But then I go back to, all right, but why do you hate it, Jan? You hate it because that's the way it's always been, and we love loyalty. Is it just easier for us as fans to keep track? And I think we hate it as fans. Let me try to answer that. Is because, especially if it's from your team, you feel like that player that you had developed a relationship with, that you supported, does not care about the support that he got, right? The player doesn't care about the fans, while the fans really love the player. But it's such a strange relationship, right? Fans, in my experience, more often than not, just love the production of the player instead of the player. And so to think otherwise, or to begrudge an 18 to 22-year-old for that, I got a tough time with that. Now, is this good for college sports? I think Jan's probably right. I don't think it is necessarily. Is it good for the players? Yes. And that's the tricky part, right? How do we balance that? What's good for the players versus what's good for the sport? And on this show specifically, I'm coming at this. I think you guys are coming at this from the fan perspective. And that's the one that, to me, is the most important, typically, in all of this. Now, I'm not going to get on board and be like ridiculous fans who send stupid messages in an emotional state and blame kids and then call them names and the whole thing. There was an Arkansas, I guess it was a radio guy or podcast guy recently, who just went on a tirade about a transfer catcher in from Kent State and called him all kinds of names and the whole thing. Like, that's ridiculous. Not that type of fan perspective. But in general, the perspective of, all right, what's going to be best for the overall sport, for fans to continue to consume, be able to support their schools moving forward, for everything, for the game, for the environment to be as healthy as possible, right? And I think a lot of people would argue that's why they weren't for name, image, and likeness at all, because they could see how it would kind of tear at the fiber of college athletics in general. And I can get that, except I don't think, in my mind personally, that negative didn't outweigh the positive of athletes who've been taken advantage of for so many years, and so much money has been made on their hard labor, getting a piece of the pie, getting a bigger piece of the pie. To me, that outweighed the negatives of the name, image, likeness situation. Mark says, I don't really like the current environment, but I do think kids deserve the ability to transfer, since coaches can bail whenever they want. Fans can be ravenous as well, but not all rainbows and unicorns. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put where I'm trying to come from on this program, and maybe stick up for in some conversations where I feel like a lot of times, publicly anyway, that voice doesn't get heard, or that perspective doesn't get considered nearly as much as it should, because you have coaches kind of looking out for coaches in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're looking out for their players. Sometimes they're just looking out for themselves, or if they're looking out for their program, that doesn't necessarily mean they're looking out for their players. You got players with maybe the least experience in the conversation, seeing it from mainly their point of view, which I get. And then that's when you have the entities who are supposed to be the adults in the room, the commissioners, presidents, conference executives, the whole thing. But when the money's involved, that's where I think it's gotten ridiculous here in the last, 20, 30 years at least, that someone never stood up and said, hey, this is unfair to the athletes to continue to have the same kind of deal. And we got to make sure we got to come up with some sort of system to make it a little bit more fair. And they just haven't. And this is where we end up. We get a guy who has a fantastic year for NC State baseball, and days after it's done, days after the surprising snub for the NCAA tournament, before the tournament even starts, this guy throws the name in the transfer portal, and NC State fans, first of all, they're ticked off they didn't get in the tournament, and now you got to see your best player, who you thought you had for at least 2 more years after a freshman of the year season, say, I don't want to play for you guys anymore. I'm going to go play somewhere else. Again, for the player, I get it. For the fans, I get it more for fans, I think. Oh, brutal. Absolutely brutal. And that's what people who are representing the NCAA should have had the foresight to figure out, that you don't want this situation. And so now you gotta pick up the pieces. And that's what a lot of the conversation is, I guess, at the last day of the SEC meetings now, and has been in the last few days, will continue to be for sure from a conference standpoint. And where the NCAA ended up coming down on this, I think, was we're going to reiterate the rule, right? No pay for play, kind of name, image, and likeness, but it's going to be up to the conferences to figure it out from there. And so now I think everybody will be looking squarely at the SEC and Greg Sankey to try to get this thing, get a handle on this thing. And good luck at this point, right? Because while you're trying to avoid situations that you don't want for programs and fans moving forward, and that just kind of leaves a sour taste in your mouth, that's kind of what this is, right? The player, it's going to be good monetarily for him, but is it going to be the best situation for him long term? I mean, it's certainly, from a fan standpoint at NC State, they can't like this move. Then the next fan base that inherits him, they're going to expect the exact same season, if not more, that he just had. And from the baseball perspective, that's going to be really difficult to replicate, and kind of sets you up for failure as opposed to set you up for success. So I don't see that working out great for anybody really moving forward, except maybe the team that gets him, and maybe he continues just to be a fantastic player. Hope so for him. Maybe makes a ton of money in college and sets the model, right, for guys who have tremendous college careers to cash in on those, because there have been a bunch, and not all of those guys go on to make a bunch of money in pro ball. And that is one of, if not that's the main reason that I think a lot of us are for the name, image, likeness stuff. But this one, it kind of brings it to a head for sure. I think it was Craig who wanted to lead us off with last night's NBA Finals. The Celtics in the fourth quarter. Holy smokes. Just going nuts. They made 10 shots in a row, I think it was. 10 shots in a row against NBA defense is pretty ridiculous. And a bunch of those threes, and the Celtics' huge fourth quarter comeback. They were down 14, I think, at one point, and went on to roll, surprisingly to me for sure, in game number 1. And these two teams, just ridiculous. 43 pointers in the game, setting an NBA Finals record, I think 20 in each half. And Steph Curry hit 6 by himself in the first quarter alone. Stephen A. Smith came up with a good line on the broadcast, right? The Celtics fought back and took the lead at halftime, and he said the Warriors should be very concerned, or anybody like him who picked the Warriors to win this game should be very concerned. Steph Curry went off and scored 21 points in the first quarter. Jason Tatum had single digits, like 6 or 8 points, I think, at halftime. The Celtics still had the lead. And even though the Warriors came out and took control of the game in the third quarter, that fourth quarter, man, impressive, especially knowing 0 experience from an NBA final standpoint on the Boston Celtics roster, which is hard to do, I would think, for a team that makes the NBA finals to not have had a single player to have made it at least on another team in a roster in some capacity. And then you got the guys on the other side, on the other end of the experience spectrum from the NBA finals perspective in their sixth: Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, who made his playoff debut, I believe, coming off an injury last night. He hit a three, at least one, part of that ridiculous record-setting performance. But huge win for the Celtics, huge fourth quarter, showing why some services had them as favorites going in. And that's the fascinating part to me. When the gambling experts can't agree on one side or the other who the favorite is, that's when you know you got a great matchup. And that's how this thing was going in. And the experience spectrum, the difference between the Celtics and the Warriors. Whew, yes, 7 for 7 from three. Mark gives us the stat in the fourth quarter. Turned it on with 8 minutes left and just saw the Celtics absolutely go nuts. So quite the start to the NBA Finals there for the Boston Celtics for sure. I don't know who I'm pulling for in this thing. I got to tell you. Typically, I'm an underdog guy if I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight, but I do like the Warriors. I find it difficult not to like Steph Curry. And when he was going nuts there in the first quarter, like, how do you feel like you're watching greatness? Right? I did. 6 threes in the first quarter and 21 points. And the way that he does it, obviously just plays with such joy and so much fun. And then you got kind of like the silent assassin and Klay Thompson to complement him. Draymond Green, just the ball of emotion that he is and plays with. And Steve Kerr just kind of hanging out, smoothly guiding the ship most of the time on the bench. I like the Warriors. On the other side, though, the Celtics with zero experience, rookie head coach, Jason Tatum, young superstar, Jaylen Brown, tremendous as well. The old guy and Al Horford, who played great last night again. I like that squad too. Marcus Smart and just how he plays and how physical and how much he shoots. And he's got the green hair Joker look going as well. I'm not going to be too upset one way or the other who wins in the NBA Finals. Yeah, Craig says Curry didn't hit the rim. And I forget who it was at a South Carolina basketball camp. Maybe one of you guys can look this up. But this had to be, I think I was maybe 16-ish. So this is a long time ago. Way too long now I think about it. So this is right around 1996-ish, I think, 98. Went to Eddie Fogler basketball camp. And I remember, I think this was the same one. Jermaine O'Neal was there as well. Coach George Klemp was one of the guest speakers, but they had another guest speaker in one day who was, I think he held the record for like most consecutive free throws made. And I'll never forget watching him just kind of warming up and the whole thing, and how, if this makes any sense to you, how not even close he came to hitting the rim on those free throws. Like how pure, maybe is the best way to put that, every shot was that left his hand that went through the net. And that's exactly what Craig is saying. But doing it in a game is a much different deal than basically having this guy had like dedicated his life to setting this free throw record and going around and being that guy. I think public speaking, and you could just tell he had it dialed in, but it was in a way that I had never seen before. And having seen a lot of basketball, it shocked me that there was another level of master of the craft you could get to where the rim isn't even a consideration for a ball that leaves your hand. It is just so much all net. It was just that dialed in. So I'll never forget that scene at the Saul Blatt PE Center back in the day at the University of South Carolina basketball camp. It wasn't John Sunvold, Craig. I know Sunvold played in the NBA. This guy did not play in the NBA as far as I remember it anyway. And Sunvold, though, he did mention that doing a South Carolina game last couple of years. Maybe I think he was doing it with Mike Morgan, and I think Mike prompted him about how many free throws he had recently just made, waiting for coaches probably at a shoot around. I think he just made 100 in a row just because he had time to kill. So ridiculous. But the shooting last night, this goes to all the critics now, all us old guys who say, oh, the game these days, they don't do the fundamentals, right? Or I guess maybe it could feed into how it's such a different game from the three. But when you make as many as they made last night, we'll check the percentage now, because it's one thing to make shots, right? If you jack up 100 of them and you make 30, great. Not a great percentage. My math genius tells me that's a 30% rate. And I'm seeing some breaking news on the old ESPN.com that the Phillies have fired Joe Girardi after 2+ seasons where the Phillies have started 7 games under 500, lost 7 of their last 9, by the way. That's according to ESPN.com. So clicking on the box score from last night of NBA Finals game number 1, I know they combined for a record 43s, and the Celtics had 21. The Warriors had 19. The Celtics shooting over 50%, 21 of 41 from 3, 51%. And the Warriors just a paltry 42% from 3. So combined, these two teams were 40 for 86. Oh, 40 for 86 shooting. We could do the math there. Sure, somebody could do it. Just under, 46%, I'm guessing 47%, something like that from 3 in the NBA Finals. Holy moly. Nuts. Now, how do you adjust on defense? Both teams. Because it was so shocking to me that Steph Curry was able to do that in the first quarter, like the Boston Celtics didn't expect him to shoot from 3. Like whatever they were doing on D, maybe they just thought they were good enough defensively to get through screens, to get on top of screens and contest those threes, and they just weren't. I don't know. And then maybe the Celtics just were out of their mind in that fourth quarter. I mean, when you hit 7 straight threes, you're out of your mind. And maybe the Warriors don't make a massive defensive adjustment, but I find it hard to believe that these teams won't adjust how they've been defending the other one and try to force them to do something else. But there's also that part to say, hey, they just made a bunch of shots. Sometimes that happens in basketball. That's not going to happen from an average standpoint in a 7-game series. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing. We had the right plan. It just didn't go our way. We're not going to deviate from that plan because the other team had an anomaly. They just went out of their mind shooting. I don't think we'll see that completely. Maybe we'll see that a little bit, but notable start to the NBA Finals for sure, with the Celtics winning that thing. And again, I think I might be pulling for the Celtics in this one, just from the underdog standpoint. The Warriors' legacy is pretty cemented. All those guys are going in the Hall of Fame that I mentioned before. I guess not Iguodala, but Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Hall of Famers. Steve Kerr on his way to be a Hall of Fame coach, looks like. You win this one, it definitely adds to that resume, but losing it's not going to take away that much. I guess you get kind of then in the LeBron, like, great, you made the finals, but you didn't always seal the deal. And we all have the Jordan standard of winning every single NBA Finals that he was in. We forget about the Bill Russell 11 titles. So I'm not going to feel too bad for the Warriors, I guess. And I like watching these Celtics play, man. They're fun. Last night, just mind-boggling in so many ways. So it's Friday. Let's see if we can mix it up a little bit on a Friday here. Try to... There we go. Keep it moving a little bit. Fill in the blank Friday. LED lights at Williams-Brice Stadium. See several more have weighed in on Twitter about that. I also retweeted a sign from Substation 2 in Rock Hill This is coming from Joe Bruno of WSOC Channel 9 up in Charlotte, where the sign says, "The Tepper sub, we quit on it halfway through." That was pretty clever. So instead of just yapping at you for all 2 hours of this program, and again, the link to join in if you want to express your opinion personally on video and join the program, you can click on the link at the top of the live stream there in the chat box. But in case you missed a little bit of what we did earlier this week, going to play some of that for you now. We'll start with North Greenville, Division II College World Series, first time ever. They're going to get going Sunday up in the Raleigh area, Cary, North Carolina, the Team USA training facility. But wanted you to see a little bit of what they had to say earlier this week. You can catch the full version of all of these videos on the YouTube channel. Would love for you to subscribe, like, comment, all of that stuff. Here's more Trey Dyson, third baseman Bat Monteith in this thing, and Landon Powell, a name most of us are very familiar with, their head coach, former Gamecock standout. North Greenville College World Series Division II this weekend. Oh, look at that. And they got the trophy.
This is Pat Monty. This kid's a superstar.
That's got high spark.
It is.
Scotty. This is a special team.
To go to your home for a World Series. I mean, how wild is that for you?
Selfishly for me, this is pretty cool. I grew up literally a mile and a half away from the USA Baseball Complex.
How sick are you guys hearing Omaha stories from your coaches who have been there and done that?
I'm looking for that look in their eye that, like, they will not lose. They're going to figure out a way to win. I was that way. Trey was that way. All great competitors have that kind of, I guess, psychotic feeling that they can't lose. It's not an option. That's really the secret ingredient, I think, to this team.
That's what a good assistant coach does. He makes the head coach look good. That's what I try to do. True team guy.
True team guy, assistant coach for North Greenville now, and headed to the College World Series. Going to start it off. They're the number 1 seed, taking on the number 8 seed on Sunday. 6 o'clock, I believe, is when they get going up in Cary, North Carolina. And again, today, in just a little bit more than an hour and 15 minutes or so, hour 20 minutes or so, you're going to get the NCAA tournament getting underway from the Division I standpoint. Those regionals are double elimination, or I should say typically double elimination. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that in the Miami deal with all the weather concerns that had originally pushed up game number 1 to 10 a.m. today and has already canceled the entire day, pushed it back one more. So we'll see how that ends up going for the Miami regional with a bunch of weather concerns. It happens every year, especially down in Florida, and those things can take forever. Reminds me of a North Carolina hosted regional the Gamecocks went to. That might have even been a super regional, I think, several years ago. That North Carolina ended up barely edging the Gamecocks out. I think this was during the Justin Smoke era. I might have that wrong. This might have been like 07-ish, somewhere in there. But just remember having to buy some cards, I think, somewhere in Chapel Hill because there was so much downtime to kill the downtime with all the weather concerns that you get in early June in a lot of places, especially down in Miami. You can understand how that goes. So we got Fill in the Blank Friday going. Gamecock football adding LED lights is making me feel old. On Twitter, we had Jason weighing in first with about time. Now we had Anthony weighing in on the Twitter just saying this is going to be good. I think it absolutely will be. I mean, the night environment at Williams-Brice Stadium is as good as it gets in college football. And I know that sounds Homer-ish, but Williams-Brice Stadium, from a college football standpoint, has basically everything that you need. It has 70,000 plus. It has high-level football, and it has a good presentation, as good a presentation that you can really get. You got the ribbon boards coming, I think, or around the stadium that will add to it as well. You had the video board added there within the last several years to where there's no problem watching a replay or the quality replay there. Now you got all these sweet amenities, the air-conditioned areas. You can purchase the alcohol. There's nothing missing from the Williams-Brice college football experience. I'm guessing the Clemson fans out there might say, well, a lot of wins are missing from the Gamecock perspective, but Shane Beamer at least righted that to some degree last year, winning 7 at home. But the LED light's going to add another element, I think. And again, this is what you got to do in college athletics these days to keep up with the Joneses and to keep people coming in person to battle the amenities that you get to enjoy at home, the comforts that you get to enjoy at home. And I think the University of South Carolina has done everything it needs to do to stay competitive in that way, this being the latest thing, right? That makes me feel really old at 44 that you're going to get basically who put it as I think that was Jason, excuse me, as a rock concert light show, laser light show. That's what you're going to get. Now, involved with major college football on a Saturday night in the fall at Williams-Brice Stadium starting September 3rd, Georgia State. Now, this might have us, put me right in there, more angry with more noon kicks, if there are any more this season, having 2 in a row, just one at Williams-Brice with the game number 3 against Georgia, game number 2 at Arkansas, actually going to be an 11 o'clock Central kick out in Fayetteville. So maybe give us more reason to look forward to night games at Williams-Brice Stadium. But we'll see. Again, to me, the game should be about the game. The thing should be about the thing, right? That's why the conversation around Monday Night Football announcers or broadcasters for the lead game on Fox or whatever it is, that the money they're paying Tom Brady to eventually become an analyst, the lead analyst for Fox, is hilarious to me. I mean, not hilarious, just mind-boggling. Like, I don't get it. People are going to watch big-time football games for the big-time football game. And you should have really good announcers for that, but you should have that across the board on a national broadcast, and by and large you do. Nope. I've never heard of anyone just tuning in for Tony Romo's analysis, by the way. Maybe there's some massive Romo fan that only watches the Tony Romo games from the NFL perspective, but I don't think so. I don't think those fans exist. I don't think that's a thing. So I just mentioned those because I don't know if you're going to go to the stadium for the lights. I don't think you're going to go to the stadium for the big screen replays. Maybe you're going to go because you can go in the air conditioning and you can buy beer or whatever. Maybe that. I think these things help a little. They help, but at such a small degree compared to, all right, who's Carolina playing this game? Vanderbilt? No, thank you. A non-Vanderbilt SEC team? Much more likely to do it, assuming that thing's going to be competitive for sure. And it looks like Carolina on its way to doing that. And June starting some camp season. It was this time last year that was massively important to Shane Beamer and company, because remember where we were this time last year? And it's so easy to forget, at least for me. Things had just changed in college sports for the first time in 2 years, I think at that point, that people could come on campus. Recruits, prospects could come on campus. There could be on-campus visits for the first time in 2 years, this time last year. So it was a whirlwind, especially for a first-year head coach and a first-year staff, by and large, to get as many people in as they could, especially at a school where the upgrades and the facilities from a football standpoint had just happened. Everything was still bright, new, and shiny, and they hadn't been able to show it off. And they did, and clearly got some momentum going. I know Shane Beamer is kind of on record here recently saying it seemed like it was almost every day in June where a commitment was going public. and he's hoping to get something similar to that going again this year. Not quite as nuts busy from just a sheer number standpoint of people coming in and doing it for the first time, because you've been able to do it since things opened up last June on the NCAA's calendar, but still necessary to get a bunch of positive momentum going. I think it's just 2 guys committed for the class of 2023 right now for Gamecock football. And if this was pre-transfer portal, I think you might be freaking out a little bit as a Gamecock fan. Say, wait a second, this is a head coach known for recruiting, and it's a massively important time to capitalize on some positive momentum coming off a bowl win and a +5 in the win category at 7-6 after a 2-10 season before then, or 2-8 campaign, I guess, in the shortened season at the end of the Will Muschamp era. So when you look at other programs out there that have double-digit commits, most of them, I think, are probably at that number right now. You say, wait a second. But with the transfer portal now, not nearly as big a deal. And you saw that from multiple position perspectives. And the Gamecocks transfer class, highly thought of this year. And I saw recently 8th in the country, and I guess but 4th in the SEC by some recruiting service out there. I know that the number has been higher with others, but this might even have to be a bit of a sliding scale with some late transfers coming in or something to that degree. I'm not sure exactly when the deadline is. I know that now everybody who's going to be in summer workouts is pretty much on campus. Austin Stogner being the last guy, I think, one of the last guys from the South Carolina standpoint, the big tight end from Oklahoma, finishing up his degree out in Norman and leaving on seemingly the best of terms out there. Thanking, I think, the university athletic department and the athletic director on his way out for everything that was done for him, and now partly responsible for getting in Spencer Rattler. So you add a big tight end, the quarterback, clearly the headliner, in Spencer Rattler. But I think maybe the less talked about, certainly from a regional, national perspective, important pieces of this year's recruiting class, which is what I'm going to call it, because now you're recruiting everybody, right? You're not just recruiting high school guys, not just recruiting junior college transfers. You're recruiting everybody, including your own guys, the guys on your roster. You got to recruit them to stay next year in the transfer portal age. But the 2 that I think might end up being the most important are transfers from smaller schools up to South Carolina, but not quite to the level we've seen from a small school before, right? So we saw the St. Francis transfers, Jason Brown, and the big receiver, E.J. Jenkins, right? And Jenkins ended up going to Georgia Tech. You got Jason Brown now at Virginia Tech. You also had Jalen Brooks, who we talked about yesterday, has rejoined the Gamecock football program, originally transferred into Will Muschamp and company. The last football he had played was at Wingate. Had a quick stop out in Texas. I believe it was Tarleton State. Never played for them. Had the opportunity to come play in the SEC. Jumped on it. But those are really massive jumps. The jumps that the more recent transfer Gamecock receivers are coming from. Less of a gap in competition coming from Arkansas State and Corey Rucker, and then James Madison and Antoine Wells. If those guys can be legit contributors, starters, guys who produce consistently for the Gamecocks on the outside, I think you're going to see the offense under Marcus Satterfield in year number 2 for the Gamecocks take gigantic leaps, because we all understand with the numbers last year, there is plenty of room to grow. And being the only school out there, I think it was, to have 4 starting quarterbacks win a game, if you count DeCarrion Joyner there in the bowl game, along with Jason Brown, Luke Doty, and Zeb Nolan. You transfer that, no pun intended, over to Spencer Rattler with all the talent with all the experience, especially compared to those other guys, minus maybe Zeb Nolan from Oklahoma, and you pair him with a chip on the shoulder with what Marcus Satterfield has as well. Classic comment in the offseason. Hey, a lot of people think we both suck right now. Let's show them otherwise. You get consistent guys on the outside, and I guess you certainly have to factor in a productive running game. You can't get defenses that are just sitting on the passing game for sure and can pin their ears back and rush the quarterback, and then you're in big trouble. But I think most of us are anticipating that from a even more healthy Marshawn Lloyd, who I think is going to be a back in the SEC. I think he's going to be that next back for South Carolina that we saw just on a consistent basis through so many years. I mean, go back to the George Rogers Heisman winning days, and then you can kind of just name them off year after year. Most recent one, actually, or not the most recent one, the most recent one in the news, another one of those guys, in Deuce Staley. So I'm on Pro Football Talk today. He's the Detroit Lions running back coach these days after a bunch of years with the Philadelphia Eagles organization, and then Doug Peterson left, and he left basically at the same time, I believe. Moved over to Detroit last year, and they've got DeAndre Swift, a really talented guy from Georgia. And so the article is, and maybe the headline was just a little misleading, or I'm not sure. They kind of got at it here, but didn't really go all in on the tone of this article. But I guess they started with one of the ways the sport of football has changed through the years is the way coaches treat injured players, and that dynamic may be playing out between Deuce Staley and DeAndre Swift. And then they don't really get into it anymore, but they basically just say that Deuce has an old school approach and has recently talked to him certainly last year about playing through injuries as a running back, and says everybody knows there's a difference between being injured and being hurt, and running backs are going to get hurt, and you got to play through it. And no comment on the other side of this thing from DeAndre Swift. The only other kind of other side of that is that Deuce Staley is pleased with how Swift responded to the conversation, but it just kind of hints at that maybe Deuce Staley is sticking his neck out there or going old school to a player or a generation of players who see things differently than his generation, which again makes me feel old, not just LED lights today, but having watched Deuce Staley light it up for Carolina and then an NFL career with the Steelers and Eagles. Now being an old school kind of guy in the NFL. But nothing about the article is anything that we all don't know. I mean, on all levels, on my very, very small level, that has basically no bearing on this at all. But what pops in my mind is my 7-year-old's trying to play a little catcher and coach pitch right now, and he gets dinged up with some foul balls. And I say, you're going to be all right. You need to walk it off. And so trying to show him how, yeah, you got some dings, got to keep powering through that. So the balancing act of knowing when a kid really needs to come off the field and gather himself, when there needs to be medical attention specifically, and when you just say, hey, man, rub some dirt on it, you're going to be fine. I dealt with that with a couple of other kids a little bit older, and some just respond so much differently than others, right? And so that's all part of the coaching thing and how you handle it. But that's at the highest level. That's where Deuce Staley is with DeAndre Swift now, right? Maybe Swift does approach it with more of a sensitized level than others. And so a coach has got to say, hey, man, got to suck it up. I have seen what you're dealing with. I think Deuce Staley has a ton of credibility with NFL guys specifically, but all football players, all running backs, because he can say, hey, I've been there. I've done that. And not all players identify with that in a great way, but I think Deuce Staley is still relatively young enough to get players, to get his message to resonate with players, a guy like DeAndre Swift, and apparently it did go well. And so you got to say, hey, I get it. You got to play through those. We got to have you. That's when we get in the real discussion right now of the push and pull between professional players and coaches, guys who are in certain spots in their contracts and don't believe they should be playing in the whole thing. But this happens at all levels. I remember being a JV basketball player, having a sprained ankle, and my coach was trying to get me to play, and I didn't think I could play. Couldn't quite cut how I wanted to cut yet, and the trainers put you through a little deal, and that makes me think of Any Given Sunday and the role of the team doctor and the whole deal. And I think that's more than just an old school approach. That is just someone at least willing to say it publicly these days, where I guess not a lot of coaches want to talk on that, or you don't want to come off as a hardline coach where a player's opinion isn't going to matter, or you can't get guys to play for you kind of deal. I think that might be more of a concern for college coaches than it is for NFL guys. Right? Mark says, should have just rubbed some dirt on it, Tim. Where's the love of the game? LOL. And that's it's so easy for us as fans to say, right? Hey, man, play through it. You know what I would give to have an NFL contract or any kind of pro sports contract? I see the money you're making, the whole thing. But how that continues, the Lions have made tons of headlines with their aggressive coaching approach here in the last year or so, right? Last season plus, since they moved on to new coach there in Dan Campbell. Deuce Staley seems to be echoing that, but doing it at a professional, respectful distance. So something to keep an eye on. DeAndre Swift, not just the fantasy numbers, but will affect that for sure. I think I've had him on a fantasy team here in the last couple of years. Guy that, from a numbers standpoint, productive dude. 2 seasons in the NFL. Almost a little bit more than 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns carrying the football. Don't have his pass catching numbers in front of me, but I know those are decent as well. But going to have to be more productive if he's ever going to be the guy in the NFL for sure. But that Georgia-Carolina dynamic, made famous by Todd Gurley, that game that Carolina just absolutely drubbed Georgia, 35-7, 2013, I think it was, where the stadium was shaking. Like, that's what I think of. That is the pinnacle of the night game at Carolina. I know if you're more old school, maybe go back to 1987, Carolina-Clemson, cold game. The Rodney chant going, Brad Edwards interception for a touchdown, and that's, I understand if that's at the top of your list for sure. Other night games that pop in my head, the Thursday night game against Ole Miss, where they came in top 5 in the country. The Steve Spurrier era, and Sandstorm was born. I get that one. There was a Kentucky game, I think maybe that same year on Thursday night. Certainly close to the same era. Eric Norwood had a couple of touchdowns on defense. The place was going nuts. Those Thursday night games, seem to stand out to me for that, but maybe just because of the performance on the field. All of those, some of the best I've ever seen. And having gone to a lot of football stadiums, been in a lot of different environments, I don't think Williams-Brice has anything to hide when it comes to challenging for those environments. And now you add in some LED lights being on display last night, tested out at Williams-Brice. That's led us to the Fill in the Blank Friday. Gamecock football, adding LED lights there's part of me that wants to say sacrilegious, right? I know they're not really football purists out there like they're baseball purists, but I don't like that in baseball. When you hit a home run and then the lights start going and you can hardly see the guy going around the base and they do the little light show. I'm not a fan of that in baseball. Football, I think, is a little different just because the emotion is there that much. And Like, the play is completely dead when you score a touchdown. There is that time in between plays for celebration only, as opposed to baseball where the guy's still rounding the bases and you're turning the lights out in the stadium. That just seems weird to me. It doesn't seem right from the baseball purist in me. And so I think I got some of that from a football purist thing. Troy from the Clemson perspective says that 87 Clemson-Carolina game on the bottom of my list. I can understand that, Troy. But throwing in the LED lights, I think it's also, if I'm filling in the blank here. So number 1 is making me feel old. Number 2, kind of sacrilegious. And then number 3 would be kind of what you got to do to keep up with the presentation that is 2022 top tier college football. And so I get it completely. I think the youngest generation of fans going to really take to that. The current students, I guess, is kind of what I think of. And I know there are other kids in the stands as well. And so this will just be, to a lot of them, I guess, coming to Gamecock football for the first time. This will just be what college football is. And that's a lot different than most of our experience, but gotta roll with it, right? Don't have to like it necessarily, but it's just going to be what it is. It'll have some of that club feel that I won't exactly love, but I'll get over it. Anthony says in baseball, it looks cool when they're bringing in the closer and they cut the lights out. Yeah, I'm with that, because again, that's a lull in the game. That is the dead ball, and it's all about presentation at that point. I'm with you, and you get it going to the music exactly on beat and the whole thing. That is cool. That, to me, you just don't like fun if you don't like that. You don't tell me you're a baseball purist. You're that guy at Wrigley yesterday that's going around on social media that smacks the beer cup pyramid. I think it was at Wrigley. The poor guy, the poor usher, I'm guessing, stadium worker who was, I'm sure, or at least I hope, was told by his supervisor that he had to go do that, because it seemed like when he walked over, it was like, this is not something that I'm enjoying doing, but I got to knock this down. For me, it's all about the noise and the towels, York says. Yeah, the towels, because it can get, and you can see it in the backdrop here if you're watching the video, you see how pitch dark it is in the sky, and then you get some lights back off towards the fairground, but that night environment, maybe it's also the garnet and black, the prevalence, a lot of people wearing black, then you get those white towels popping against that. Fantastic. Troy, back to the announcer thing. And basically, this is just the presentation, or the way that we talk about the presentation of football. I've never watched a game for the announcers, but I have cut the volume off because of the announcers. I think a lot of people are with Troy on that one, especially if I'm guessing Troy has probably come to the conclusion that there's a clear anti-Clemson bias on the broadcast, which I have very rarely heard. I think maybe in college baseball, I've heard it a little bit because they are basically regional broadcasts on the SEC Network Plus, that you get a broadcast team that seems to clearly be coming at it from more of the home team vantage point. I think a lot of times it's just a natural product of what's going on in the game, and you don't like it because it's not going well for your team, and so you're going to not like what you hear and think for some reason that it's their fault. It's the announcer's fault. I think that's just naturally how we hear things as fans of football games. So Gamecock football adding LED lights, one of the, I guess that's the newest thing at Williams-Brice Stadium, on display last night. New today will be the NCAA baseball tournament getting going. Noon, where the earliest games start. It was supposed to be 10 a.m. today after yesterday's announcement. They're trying to move things up in Miami, but weather delaying it completely today, postponing it completely today. And so games throughout the day, starting at noon, 6 o'clock today is when Coastal Carolina, the only South Carolina team, the only team from the state of South Carolina, will be playing. They're going to play Virginia up at East Carolina. That one on ESPN Plus. The rest of the game, scrolling on the video portion of the ticker, going to be on either the SEC Network, ACC Network, or ESPNU or 2. I think we have another game. I guess maybe that might be the first one. ESPN 2 game, UCLA in that sucker from a national standpoint. And how this thing gets covered nationally is really interesting too. Might want to keep an eye out for the Sports Center top 10 plays. I'm guessing you're going to have quite a few from college baseball over the next several days. We'll see, though, right? Always competing with the big leagues this time of year. The NBA Finals, the NHL playoffs as well, getting close to the finals. I think, 4 teams are left. I think we're in conference finals. But the field of 64 gets going today. That will be cut down to 16 in a matter of just a few days. I would go percentage-wise, I would think it's probably about 12. 75% at least, might be even be a little bit higher, of home teams in NCAA college baseball regionals who advance to the super regionals. Because those home teams typically, and this year unanimously across the board, are the number 1 seeds. Last year was one of the exceptions in Columbia with Old Dominion coming in as the number 1 seed, but they didn't have the facility to host. So the Gamecocks got to host, but not be the number 1 seed. I would think it's about 75% of the time, at least, maybe even a little bit more, that the home teams, the number 1 seeds, move on. But also, we talked to Stuart Lake about this a little bit earlier this week. Seemingly every single year on a Friday night when these regionals get going, you got one of those 4 seeds who you might not even known plays baseball. Like New Mexico State plays a late game tonight against Oregon State as the 4 seed. Starts at 10:30. I didn't know New Mexico State played baseball. I mean, I guess I kind of assumed, but I've never seen. Are they the Lobos, I mean? Not sure. It's either New Mexico Lobos or New Mexico State Lobos. I forget which one. You guys help me out with that if you know. But never seen a game ever of baseball for a New Mexico State. They might end up battling Oregon State at home, pulling off a huge upset. If it's Alabama State at Tennessee, massive news, right? 53-7 is what Tennessee goes into tonight's game at home. Their record, ridiculous. SEC regular season champ, tournament champ, and won the regular season by, I think, a record 6 games, which was even better than that 2000 Gamecock team that rolled, I think, with a similar 25-5 record in conference. So if they were to get upset, or any of these 1 seeds, really, it's the college baseball version, the Aggies. I thought it might be the Aggies out there. Thank you, Mark. So it's New Mexico Lobos, New Mexico State Aggies. I was going to say Wolfpack. I thought it was one of those redundant ones, right? It's Nevada, that's like NC State, and it's New Mexico State, like Texas A&M. Got it. I'll try not to forget that one moving forward, but I can't promise you anything when it comes to New Mexico State athletics. So you always had the basketball, the 16 seeds against the 1 seeds, but you only had 4 opportunities for that to happen every single year, and it took forever until Maryland, Baltimore County did that to Virginia a few years ago. You've had 4 seeds upset 1 seeds in college baseball, but you have, 12 more opportunities every single year. And baseball is such a goofy game in that way. If you get a pitcher, a frontline pitcher who has his stuff, you can shut down the best offense in college baseball, or certainly one of the top 16 offenses in college baseball. I don't know if anybody can shut down Tennessee baseball this year. Yeah, good question from Mark. Are we going to adopt a team basically on the show to pull for? And Coastal's got to be the one, right? If we got to do that. And then so maybe we should pick one of the 16 top seeds where Mark is going, and says wouldn't mind Georgia Southern as well. I think that's a great call. So we've got the official, unofficial baseball team of the show is the North Greenville Crusaders. And obviously the unrestricted free agent vibe has helped them advance to their first College World Series in school history. But in the Division I level now, you got to go Coastal Carolina, but they're almost a non-underdog in a lot of ways. You can't win a national championship within the last 7 years or so and then turn around and claim, oh, huge underdog going in. But being the only team from the state of South Carolina, gotta have that. And then I think Georgia Southern, the natural extension, you don't necessarily want to adopt an SEC or ACC school, and that's half of the regional hosts, half of those top 16 seeds, 4 each from the SEC and ACC. Troy says he is doing that, actually, as a Clemson fan, pulling for NC State. Oh, that's right, they're not in. My bad. Oh, just rude. Absolutely rude. And Mark, not that I know of, I'll pull it out or I'll put it out on social media if you can follow along in that Division II College World Series. North Greenville plays on Sunday. That's when they start the double elimination College World Series. And I'll definitely get that info out, or at least retweet it from North Greenville's Twitter account. You can go North Greenville Baseball. I'm sure has all that information for you. But as far as I know, no video feed of that. They might have it somewhere on the internet. I would be surprised if they don't, actually. But the question would be, I guess, do you have to pay for it or not? And I see where I think admission is free. That's where they're at with the Division II College World Series. So again, the quality of baseball, not that far off from Division I. The way that it is embraced by the community is certainly a lot different. I mean, North Greenville, don't get me wrong, they couldn't be more thrilled to be doing what they're doing. Landon Powell, obviously, padding his resume, and what I saw the relative media hype, that name being mentioned in the Clemson conversation, but he gave the answer that coaches have to give this time of year, that he's only focused on his team right now and moving forward. And when we had him on the other day, I wasn't going to put him in that position to even mention it. But will be interesting to see how much consideration he gets for that job, how much consideration he would give that job, being a former Gamecock guy, having seen a former Gamecock assistant, Monty Lee, who actually was there when Landon was there back in the day, and the Gamecocks made the 3 consecutive appearances in the College World Series. I think Monty came in 2003 for that second one, if I'm not mistaken, right behind Stuart Lake as the volunteer assistant for Ray Tanner and Company. Yeah, I remember Monty specifically helping me out with a story I was doing for WOLO back in the day. This was when Kevin Malillo was doing his mustache deal, and they were giving out Malillo mustaches to Gamecock fans at the Sarge during the postseason run. So, got to go North Greenville, number 1, the official team of the program. Coastal Carolina, the official team from a Division I standpoint, and then I'm down with Georgia Southern as the national or the regional seed that the show can pull for moving forward in the college baseball tournament. Gets going again just a little bit here, 45 minutes or so. The noon game will start, and then you get games all over the place. And the first couple of days of regionals, or really this first regional weekend, there's so many games, there's so much to follow. It can be overwhelming for sure, and that's a good reason maybe Mark points out. Just adopt a team, check them out. Maybe you keep an eye on a couple other games, and you see how it all shakes out. But mention Stuart Lake, wanted you to hear, and if you heard it earlier this week, I think it can bear repeating, his take on where Clemson heads from here, the perception of the program. Graham Neff, at 38 years old, made the move earlier this week. Certainly the headlining news in the state of South Carolina this week, after Coastal Carolina being the only school from the state to make the college NCAA tournament field of 64 from the Division I. You got the College World Series for the first time in Division II for North Greenville, and I think really superseding all of that is Monty Lee is out at Clemson. So now the question becomes, all right, where do they go? Here's Stuart Lake's informed take, being an assistant coach at South Carolina, not this past season, but the year before, for those 4-year run, I think it was, under Mark Kingston. Before then, head coach at Charleston Southern. So hear what he has to say, then we'll continue that discussion a little bit. The Clemson program, how strong do you feel like it is moving forward now after these 7 years under Monty Lee, and how attractive of a job is it out there in the college baseball world?
Well, I think we'll always be biased if we grow up in this state. And I've been very open. I've grown up a Gamecock fan my whole life, but I still see it as an elite job. And what I see it attracting is the upper echelon of the coaches. I mean, we'll talk about it as we get into the tournament later, but Texas A&M last year did not make the SEC tournament, much less a regional. They go ahead and say, hey, we're going to put more into this. We're going to get a guy. And they go get Coach Slosh, and they go from TCU. They're hosting this year. And as I was looking through my stuff, they're not only hosting, they're number 5 national seed.
And hosting TCU.
And TCU, which is how. And you think the NCAA guys don't know that in a room. I love it when they go, oh, that just worked out. But my point being, I think Clemson's that kind of job too. I think they'll probably end up hiring a very upper end guy. And I know there was comments yesterday made on, they're going to have to pay more and do this and that. Well, probably will, but that's one of those jobs that's been known as a baseball school since Coach Wilhelm, Coach Leggett, and honestly with Monty. So I think they'll end up getting a really high-end guy to come in there, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them right back in the mix next year.
Stewart, there you can watch the full take on the Clemson situation as a show segment on the YouTube page. You can watch the entire show. I believe he was on Wednesday with us from a couple of days ago. You can always go back and watch the full shows on there, and have been taking out some specific segments here recently and popping those up as well on the YouTube page. At the full shows only on the audio version of the podcast. Maybe we'll get the segments up and rolling on there. Eventually, we'll see. It's a fill-in-the-blank Friday there. I guess the fill-in-the-blank on that one would be who the next head coach of Clemson baseball will be blank. And I know Notre Dame situation, East Carolina coach, Louisville coach Dan McConnell with ties down here, Kevin O'Sullivan at Florida, Tim Corbin with Clemson ties as well, all names that have been thrown out there. But it's interesting to me that Stuart Lake thinks it will be a name, not necessarily one of those, but certainly one that college baseball fans are relatively familiar. And again, college baseball, certainly not like college football, where we know, 50 names probably as just fans of college football. We know at least 50 names of college football head coaches, I would say. It's probably more like 15 max for college baseball for a lot of us, maybe even less than that. Just being what college baseball is. But it's a lot more these days than I think it has ever been. And the money that those guys make, Stuart mentioned it in his segment, certainly a lot different. He was talking about how he remembered when Ray Tanner got a raise early on in his Carolina career to end up making 6 figures. And then by the time Ray Tanner was done, he was making 7 figures. I mean, that is a great example of the tremendous growth of the sport, I think, in a lot of ways. And where Clemson sits right now is, I think, in a position of strength in a lot of ways. Mark says Clemson's going to get Dan McDonald, and all of us Carolina fans will be sad. I would be shocked if that happens. He says he just feels it in his bones. He's the Louisville coach with South Carolina ties, having been at the Citadel, I think, and Stewart is a buddy of Dan and wanted him actually to drive up to Louisville. But Louisville's the 12th seed right now. I've been in the College World Series at least once, I think multiple times. I don't know that Clemson can offer that much more in the same conference to lure Dan McDonald down. I don't think that No, let me change that. That situation would not be as good as the one he's in right now. So it would have to be a big dollar jump, I would think, to make that move attractive, unless there are things that we don't know about as from the outside looking in, like a facilities deal or a personality conflict within the athletic department with the athletic director and the baseball program. But I think the facilities at Louisville pretty good. Last I looked. I mean, you got the Papa John's connection, I think, with that school, and probably talked to our buddy down at Troy now, the former Gamecock coach Skylar Meade, former Louisville player. He would probably be the best to talk about that with. But yeah, I don't see that happening, but it could. And I get it if you're concerned about that from the Carolina perspective, or and maybe there was a disassociation there. I just know that I think maybe it's the Yummy Center that their basketball facility is called. He says I think there was a falling out a bit ago. Yeah, it happens for sure. Just thinking about the money connections that have popped up through the years and how Louisville had the Patino shadiness stuff, and maybe that was a bit a part of that, or maybe that was another deal a little later. But in my mind, Louisville, from a facility standpoint, from a major college program standpoint, they're up there. Clemson baseball certainly historically above Louisville, but recently, like within the last 15 years, I don't think necessarily there. Last 10 years, certainly. And being the number 12 seed this year, been a national seed, I think, multiple times here, while Clemson has not made it to a super regional since the Jack Leggett era. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. At least doesn't make a lot of sense to me on paper, but we've seen more surprising things happen. I mean, the fact that Texas A&M got Jim Schlossnagle was massively surprising to me. A guy that had built up the TCU program. TCU had been so good, and now fascinating that he's going to be coaching against them. It's going to be, well, we assume, going to be coaching against them, being in the same regional this year. Like Stewart mentioned, it just happened to happen. It just happened. So other than that, where does Clemson look to? What is realistic? And I'm going to be really surprised if they don't pay top dollar or pretty close to it. I would imagine to some degree, the thought process can be you don't have to pay top dollar to have a top level baseball program. I think that's the perception I have of Ray Tanner's approach to it at South Carolina with his hiring of Mark Kingston and his personal experience having not been paid top dollar back in the day and built the Gamecock program into the national powerhouse that he did. I think, like I mentioned, college baseball has changed so much, and Ray Tanner a big part of that. I don't know if Clemson can take that same viewpoint and make it happen, but we've seen like Tony Vitello over at Tennessee, a great example of a guy who wasn't a top name for most of us that aren't completely plugged into the baseball world, right? A guy who hadn't been a head coach before, clearly doing an amazing job. And it was the right pick, and it couldn't have been a better pick. So the public perception, I think, of college baseball hirings is so uninformed mostly. And I'll even though I consider myself a big college baseball guy, I'm not a plugged-in guy to the ins and outs of the up-and-coming guys in the coaching ranks and how all of those details are shaking out. Certainly always considered Ray Tanner to be that guy, and was really surprised that Mark Kingston was the guy several years ago to take over for Chad Holbrook as opposed to more of a big name guy, knowing the situation that the program was in. And clearly there have been, I think, mixed results at best in the last several years, and this year will be the ultimate kind of gauge, I think, for Mark Kingston and the Gamecock baseball program moving forward, now that they've said that that's what's going to be happening, that Mark Kingston will be returning, and Clemson doing it. I guess there are a couple of other openings out there. Actually, there are a bunch of openings out there. But as far as on the level of Clemson, I think that job is such an elite job in college baseball that they're not going to have a ton of competition, is probably the best way to put that, in going after their next guy. The competition will probably be, according to Stuart Lake, the current job that guy has. And can you convince big-time guys to come to the Clemson program where they know they will have tons of resources, tons of talent, but also tons of pressure to not just perform, but to do it in the postseason and to do it consistently at a Hall of Fame rate, like not the previous coach did, but the one before him did, and the one before that did. And the fact that Stuart Lake, I don't know if he pointed it out in that clip right there. I think he did. Maybe this was in the beginning of his segment talking about the Clemson job, a lot like the Pittsburgh Steelers when it comes to longevity and head coaches. And Monty Lee's 7 years, the exception there, with Jack Leggett had been there for decades, and Bill Wilhelm decades before that. So interesting kind of subtext, I guess, right now for the college baseball tournament with the Clemson job being open. Troy says, other than Tennessee, I think all regionals are wide open. I think wide open is putting it a little bit too far on the spectrum there, Troy. I think from a college baseball perspective especially, weird things can happen. And again, that was part of the amazing consistency that Gamecock fans got spoiled because of Carolina being able to roll through consistently at home, especially when they earned home regional host sites. They went on and advanced in the Ray Tanner era. And that was one of the things that hurt Chad Holbrook, seeing Maryland come in and upset the Gamecocks, something that hadn't happened. And so when I'm looking around the field of 16 seeds out there, agreed that there are no other real dominant teams other than Tennessee that jump off the page, but 2 through 16, maybe 2 through 12 seem to have so much talent, and then the depth that comes into play in regionals. Because we got to remember, I was talking to my buddy John Wilson out in Texas, and from the Texas A&M perspective, their concern all season long has been pitching depth. And they have figured out a way to do it, to win series, 3-game series, to win 2 out of 3. But the concern out there is you got to win 3 games to get out of a regional. And do you have the pitching to make that happen? But on the flip side of that, who's coming in? Maybe TCU is the easy answer, right? With more pitching depth than a Texas A&M should have, or does have, at least from a talent standpoint, right? And this is the time of year. One of the reasons why I love this year. And Virginia has been a great example through the years. I think Virginia last year had guys step up that maybe hadn't had a bunch of opportunity or success through the season. Florida this year, towards the end of the year, the SEC tournament, for instance, I think they had a guy a freshman lefty throw in that semifinal game, maybe it was even the finals, that hadn't pitched since the beginning of April, and threw well. And it's one of the things I think that we latch on to from the fan perspective when we see guys, Perry Orth, who we have on the show often, right? A guy who could have gone to a smaller school and chose to go walk on to a big program. And he's told it to us point blank here. His goal wasn't just to be on the team. His goal was to play, to become the starting quarterback, which he did. And he did it with just sheer focus and tenacity and blood, sweat, and tears, desire, dedication, all those things. And when we see guys who haven't had success get that opportunity and have success. Oh, it's great. I think we can all identify with that drive, that consistency that you just go in, day out, you do your job, you try to get better, and you're not getting recognized for what you're doing. And then all of a sudden you get your chance and you come through. The Michael Roth story back in the 2010 College World Series, an example of that, right? A guy who hadn't got many opportunities on the mound and then came through in the biggest moment, and then not just did it once, right? Parlayed that into an All-American career and one of the best ever in college baseball. But he was at that point earlier in the year. At that point earlier in the year thinking, hey, this might not work out. I might not be good enough. And actually wanted to be a hitter anyway. And turned out he wasn't good enough to be the first baseman at South Carolina from an offensive standpoint, and adjusted big time. And you saw what happened. And so now, just because you have to win 3 games, which is different than the regular season structure of series, right? Obviously, you'd love to win a 3-game series by winning all 3 games. You love to sweep teams, but you don't set it up necessarily with that end goal in mind. You set it up by, hey, we need to win the series. So if you get down in game 1, a lot of times you don't throw your best guy to stop it, to stop the bleeding right there, knowing you have to win that game to advance or win all 3. A lot of times you'll throw other guys out there. Innings eaters is what they're referred to, I think, a lot of times. You just got to go eat some innings for us, because we got to have other guys available later on. Now, you're going to have that happen in regionals as well, possibly, because you got to win 3 games in a regional, and if you get down big, you're going to see some of those guys pop out there, but not nearly like you would, I don't think, on a Friday night in the SEC, for instance, for a team like Texas A&M, for a team like South Carolina this year that had some depth issues when it came to their pitching staff. But you are going to see guys in important roles, a starting role, maybe a first reliever up early on in a tournament where maybe one of your frontline guys struggles, that they're going to have to be the guy. They're going to, if you're going to advance, if you're going to move on, that you're going to have to step up and make big time pitches time after time after time, or maybe be a guy that gets plugged into the lineup and come through with some big hits with a couple outs and men on and the whole thing. And the emotion that goes into all of that, because remember, and this level of baseball is as intense, I think, as any level in a lot of ways. And maybe more so because of where your career is, right? It's kind of the tipping point in major college baseball. If you succeed in major college baseball, you're going to move on to pro ball. If you don't succeed in major college baseball, you're not likely to move on to pro baseball. I think pro scouts, in a lot of ways, unless you hit a certain number on a radar gun these days or have a certain spin rate, maybe they can overlook lack of success on the mound. They can do that a lot more than you can lack of success at the plate. Because I think a lot of scouts look at college baseball as a proving ground, as the developmental process without having to do it themselves in minor league ball or rookie ball or low A ball. That's what major college baseball equates to. And then they evaluate accordingly. And so guys can make a lot of money this time of year, man. I think we saw it. And maybe Jackie Bradley Jr. or Whit Merrifield or Christian Walker would have gone on to great careers anyway, had they gone to a different school, had they gone to pro ball straight out of high school, had they gone to junior college and then gone to pro ball. Maybe they would have, if they hadn't have gotten the Gamecock baseball experience, or maybe even gone to another school. They still would have produced how they produced. we'll never know, but we do know that it certainly seemed like to be the right path for them. And then Gamecock fans got to enjoy that with them and through them, and the national championships came with it. So just a couple of the reasons why I love this NCAA baseball tournament that's going to get going today, and a reason to keep an eye on it for sure. Not sure that I would say that I love the NBA Finals these days, but hard not to love last night's game if you just have ever been anyone who will chuck up some threes. The Celtics ended up hitting 7 threes in a row, 10 shots in a row, or they were 7 for 7 from 3 in the fourth quarter at one point. Both teams combining to shoot 40 out of 86 from 3 last night, a ridiculous percentage, record number of threes. And the Celtics pulling the upset at Golden State in game number 1, which I think gives them, obviously, the massive upper hand in the NBA Finals, especially for a team that had 0 experience across their roster in the finals. Going against a team that has plenty of guys in their 6th NBA Finals shows you how little experience can matter sometimes. Now, as I say that, then I try to zoom out. 7-game series, okay. Ultimately, how the series goes will show us how much experience matters, because it might end up on the other side, right? I'm sure Celtics players like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown being warned against getting too comfortable or confident with this 1-game lead, knowing that they still got to win 3 more games, and that ain't going to be easy. Certainly the championship pedigree of Steph Curry and company not going to let them lay down and ride to any kind of NBA Finals cruising to the championship kind of deal. So that's where that is. Certainly worth watching last night. And then from the Gamecock perspective, we got the fill in the blank Friday. Gamecock football adding the LED lights. And it's even hard to fathom college football for me right now in a lot of ways, because of how hot it is and how kind of distant it is with the SEC meetings wrapping up today. But the recent conversation of, okay, how's the schedule going to move forward, and the whole thing has helped us, I think, fill that football gap for sure. And now you got the added display, the added bonus of a bit of a different presentation for Gamecock football coming into 2022, and basically updating, I think, in a lot of ways, the presentation, the experience, the environment of night football, which anybody that's ever been, I think, embraces and loves. And now you just got another new toy, really, to play with, to be a part of, to experience as a college football fan in Columbia, South Carolina. This other college baseball news recently, I think, is absolutely fascinating in so many ways. Tommy White is the slugger, nicknamed Tommy Tanks, freshman of the year in college baseball. And NC State was the school that a lot of college baseball experts could not explain why they didn't get in the College World Series, or in the NCAA tournament, I should say, coming off of the College World Series run last year that was cut short because of COVID issues. Having a top 30, I think, or top 35 even, RPI. I think 36 and 21, something like that was their record. Not overwhelming, but most thought plenty good enough to get into this year's NCAA tournament. It didn't happen, and now their slugger has put his name in the transfer portal. And the way the story goes is he's from Florida, wants to be closer to home. Also, in combination with that, might be able to make more money at a program that will be welcoming his transfer services. And that's when the name, image, likeness stuff comes in. And something that I don't think any of us want to see happen in college sports. I'm all for These guys making more money, making money to begin with, more money. They deserve the piece of the pie, but that's why the story was so big with the Bolitnikoff Award winner from Pittsburgh, the wide receiver, and Jordan Addison ended up transferring over to Southern Cal. Now, he says it was because offensive coordinator change and position coach change, and obviously his quarterback no longer there. So his situation did change, but the report was there was also a deal for, I forget what the report was, like $3 million or something crazy out there in name, image, likeness money for him on the table from Southern Cal, and that's why he was really transferring. So none of us, I think, that wanted to see something improve in the situation, a piece of the pie go to players, wanted to see them just put themselves up for auction in a lot of ways, put their services out there to the biggest bidder and see what they could get. And that's what it feels like in a lot of ways with this situation with Tommy Tanks at NC State, and especially on the day that the NCAA baseball tournament starts, where, man, this thing is still about as pure as it gets from a competition standpoint in major college athletics. And I get it if you don't consider college baseball major college athletics. Having been to a lot of these regionals and being fortunate enough to go to the College World Series a few times, I do. And seeing a lot of these guys go on to major league careers is one of the reasons that I do. But to see this happen now with one of the biggest names in college baseball this year, it doesn't feel good for sure. It doesn't feel like it's something that we can be excited for, even though the guy is going to make good money and probably going to end up in a good spot. Florida State, you guys have brought up, that seems like is going to be probably where he lands, having played with several of their players before growing up in Florida. I mean, transferring in conference to another place, I get it, closer to home, but also where you can make maybe more money off your name, image, and likeness stuff. Not what we want moving forward, I don't think. But it's where we are. And again, I don't blame the player one bit. You only have a few years from the college baseball perspective. Most top-level players have 3 years, right, to cash in on that. And cashing in on that from his perspective, why not? Another story out there, I believe it was Tuesday this week, there was a filing in court, the latest version of our college athletes' employees. This is Johnson versus the NCAA. Johnson is a guy who played at Villanova, and there are several other, I think, athletes involved in this particular suit that played somewhere up in there. Cornell, I saw pop out in the whole thing. No, not frontline guys necessarily. Certainly nowhere near an Ed O'Bannon, who had the marquee case from a name, image, and likeness standpoint, or at least the video game name, image, and likeness, and was basically the reason why EA Sports stopped doing their NCAA college football and college basketball games. But this one, I'm reading about it, and again, the court stuff and the arbitration issues and players union versus commissioner's office and all of that kind of stuff. Not my favorite thing to discuss when it comes to the sports world, but especially these days with the name, image, and likeness and the direct impact it's having on Gamecock football with Spencer Rattler coming in. And I know the public statements have been, it had nothing to do with him coming to South Carolina. I think a lot of us might look at that like we looked at Jimbo Fisher saying that they did nothing wrong in their recruiting class. Okay. I understand saying that, but I think most of us understand too the reality of the situation. And they have this rancor out there with name, image, and likeness and how much college athletes are worth. And Spencer Rattler is way up there, and he at least has one deal in Columbia to drive a truck around and seems to be doing well. I think bobbleheads are going to be coming out soon. I saw on social media. He was just hanging out with Don Staley maybe yesterday. At least that's when I saw the social media pictures pop up. But the name, image, and likeness environment combined with the legislation, one of the reasons why the name, image, and likeness thing came through is because of the Supreme Court decision that was 9-0 against the NCAA. And so now this is the next level, I guess, that could go against the structure that has been college athletics, with athletes not being considered employees. It's a complicated one in a lot of ways for me, because clearly people are making a lot of good money off of college athletes, right? Off of their work. And there's a certain, there are a lot of other sports out there where there is the same kind of time requirement, dedication, and nobody's making any money off of track and field or tennis or, fill in the blank for non-revenue generating sports. So are they employees of a bad business and basketball and football players are employees of a good business? Because obviously no one's making these athletes do any of this. This is all kind of voluntary stuff. So will you be considered an employee if that business is making money? I think if you're going to be considered employees across the board, well, if your particular sport isn't making money, how longer is the sport going to be there? How long do you keep that business going? That doesn't make any sense. So this one is a massively complicated. The way that the lawsuit reads, I think, or one of the examples that's brought up is that students who were working these games that the athletes were playing at, taking tickets, being ushers, whatever, they're getting paid. And then the guys on the floor, who everybody's paying to go see, aren't getting paid, which is ridiculous. My buddy Mike Gillespie, who we had on the show yesterday from ABC Columbia, while he was at Florida, I think it was while he was in grad school, was calling games, specifically Florida softball games, I think at the time, play-by-play wise. And he said he always felt kind of bad he didn't get that he would go to these games where other fellow students were playing, and he would talk about the games, and he would get paid for it, and the people playing the games wouldn't get paid for it. I've always said, as someone who has been a professional sports broadcaster, both in local TV and local radio, the content of what I've always done professionally, having that and getting paid for it, having these players produce that content but not get paid for it, it struck me as wildly hypocritical to come out and be the guy that said, no, they can't get paid. And the coaches that have done that too, I haven't understood that. I get that the structure certainly does have plenty of benefits for players, for college players, right? And especially these days where tuition is astronomical in college, that there is plenty of value in a scholarship. But when we were talking about, this came up today because of the college baseball situation in NC State with Tommy Smith transferring, putting his name in the transfer portal. When you have a sport like 11.7 scholarship limit of college baseball, why wouldn't you try to go up your percentage of your scholarship somewhere else if there was going to be a better deal? And from a coaching standpoint, I absolutely get it, man. You don't want that to be a part of your life. You don't want to have to recruit your own players year after year. And you have seen plenty of guys improve their lives tremendously, go on to get a good degree and use that degree and education to set up a tremendous foundation for their own lives, no doubt. But the trick will be to be able to continue to do that and also set up some sort of system to where the astronomical profits don't go directly to coaches and then administrators, but can also get to players. Troy, that is a bold suggestion, sir. 8 1 seeds advance in the regionals to the super regionals, what you're saying? So you're saying half of the super regional field will be non-top 16 seeds. I would think 10 would be a still pretty aggressive bet. I would say anywhere 12 plus would be the conservative number about top seeds moving forward. I'm just trying to think of how many I think will lose. And I started, or earlier this show, I said I think it's got to be historically at least 12 of the 16 teams move on, somewhere in there. 75% of 1 seeds in the NCAA baseball tournament move on. So you're going to go down to 50%. Only 50% of the 1 seeds advance. That'd be fine with me. And we see it all the time that 2 teams will advance to a super regional, and both of them, neither one of them, I should say, was a number 1 seed at the regional they just won. So 8 would be fantastic. I would say, yeah, anywhere 10 or fewer is still going to be fun. You get up to the 12 plus range, and it'll be like, ho-hum. But then still, you get to see great matchups in the super regional, and then that's where you get back to that best 2 out of 3 series, and where it gets a little less chaotic or crazy. Some of those opportunities I talked about before just don't happen. They don't happen nearly as frequently anyway, where you get a guy that you kind of, by default, he's going to be your starter. By default, you got to bring him out of the bullpen because you don't really have anybody left. So looking forward to all of the college baseball on the weekend for sure. Looking forward to a good NBA Finals series, because I think we would all be surprised if the Celtics go on and close out the Warriors in 5 games or something like that. I would be shocked by that. I'd be shocked if we don't get a big response from the Warriors in game number 2 and a relatively easy win. And the series, be absolutely shocked if the series doesn't go back to Boston 1-1. Let's put it that way. But also, it will be interesting to keep an eye on these 3-point numbers, right? Combining for 40 in game 1. We've never seen that before. How close will these teams get? They shot 86 of them, I believe it is. How much will that continue moving forward? I understand the NBA game has gone to this, right? The Steph Curry effect, the James Harden effect. Guys have jacked up a bunch of threes. What the Houston Rockets have done this for almost a decade ago. They started this thing. They said either shoot threes or a layup. That was their philosophy. Mike D'Antonio, that the math works out the best if you shoot threes or layups. But 43s, man, last night made for quite the display, quite the fourth quarter for the Celtics, helping them overcome a 14-point deficit, go on to the upset win in game number 1. At least I think it's fair to say at Golden State, still an upset, even though some people had them favored going in, even without any experience in the NBA Finals, knowing that the Warriors are as experienced as they are with the 6th final for Steph Curry and company. So hoping that we continue to get marquee matchups, marquee games, marquee performances is probably the best way to put that in the NBA Finals. And then I want to see 3 upsets. No, that's probably too many. Definitely 2. I'd love to see 2 top seeds lose out in game 1s of regionals, 2 out of the 16, right? I think that's a fair number. 1 should happen, 2 might happen, 3 is unlikely, I think. This is number 4 seeds, man. It's so tough because a lot of times such a small school, and even if you got your ace going, sometimes you don't even throw the ace because you think you got a better chance to win game number 2. Let's see. Mark weighing in on the NBA Finals. Chances are the Celtics don't get as much production from their non-key players moving forward. Tatum only scored like 13. I think he had 15 and 13 assists, something like that. And it was a record for an NBA Finals debut for assists, Jason Tatum. So, yeah, it's going to take massive efforts from a lot of different guys from the Celtics to continue this run. But they got it last night in the fourth quarter, I think, when nearly everybody expected them to, hey, that was a pretty good game. Warriors too good. And as expected, defend home turf in game number 1. You move on. Maybe you try to steal game 2, going back to Boston, but it didn't happen. And just shows you when a team catches fire like that, it's hard for me not to enjoy watching that, even if it's not the team that I want to win, just because it's so electric. And that's what that NCAA baseball tournament can be too, in a much different way. But teams are having so much fun. And I think those lesser seeded teams, right? The teams that aren't the number 1 seeds, or maybe aren't the Power 5 schools going in, they're playing with such little pressure, with everything to gain, icing on the cake mentality, that sometimes you see baseball magic this time of year. Troy weighing in with the exact teams, the exact top seeds in the regionals, he doesn't think will move on. So he's got Auburn, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, East Carolina, Georgia Southern, Texas, Maryland, and Louisville. So he's with. Nope. So that makes sense with the prediction that 8 top seeds will not advance. Those are the ones he's gone through the bracket. You guys do your June Madness. I don't think that is a thing. I'm a college baseball nerd, but I've never done that before. Nice work, Troy. Filling out that thing and putting names to numbers there. Those are the ones we'll try to keep you accountable for that when we come back and do our next show on Monday. Get a couple of guests in, mix it up a little bit more for sure. Who knows what else we'll have to discuss coming off the regional weekend. You know, never thought that we'd have this week the massive news that we talked about the last couple of days of Dustin Johnson headlining that Live Series field of 42 that was set. I guess we'll get 6 more guys. The big golf controversy yesterday was Hideki Matsuyama getting disqualified because he had marks on his 3-wood. And I saw the actual marks on social media all this morning. It's really weird. I guess it's like whiteout. Looks kind of like the shape of a ball, but the official like rubs his finger over the club head and can feel I don't even know, the marks aren't just like magic marker would be, right? Where you can't feel them. And if you can feel them, that's when it's illegal. And then the golf nerds are going back and forth about whether how much against the rules that was, or the spirit of the rules, or the whole thing, how much of an advantage that was Matsuyama doing that on purpose, trying to minimize bad shots with taking off the spin if it hit outside of there, whatever it was. That was a classic 2022 sports nerd discussion on social media about Hideki Matsuyama being DQ'd yesterday. What was it, like 6 guys, I think, tied for the lead at the Colonial after round number 1. So who knows what will happen as we get closer towards the U.S. Open for the men, the women's U.S. Open underway this weekend as well, something to keep an eye on. But I'll be fully invested in college baseball, and we have the record now of Troy's upset picks, 8 out of 16. We'll keep them accountable when we come back on Monday for that, as this show is all about accountability, right? And trying to come to sports with the fans' perspective top of mind, and then the unrestricted free agent part of it as well, for sure. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Let's see if we can get some more music back in here. I think by the time we roll, so this, we did it. How about that? Typically by the time the show ends, I think I haven't done a good job as a producer to keep the music alive in the window on the computer. A step in the right direction is where We Cocky ends us on Twitter on the Fill In the Blank Friday. Gamecock football adding LED lights is a step in the right direction. I think we got to give it Jason P. about time in keeping up with a laser light rock concert environment that other college football stadiums have had for a little bit. He's pumped about that. Hope you're pumped for the weekend. Thanks for hanging out with us on a Friday morning in the summer. We still got a creative summer in front of us for sure here. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. See you guys on Monday.